Hello and welcome back to Just Code It. Today we're going to be creating a application that allows you to chat with any GitHub repo that's public. To the right, I have the completed application. What you do is you put in an Ollama model, how many retrieval chunks you want, chunk size, overlap, give it the URL. This is the URL for this actual project, type of files you want it to actually look at for chatting, and then you load the index. This is just downloading, and then you can see I got 42 chunks, 5 files. And then what is this repository about? Thinking for a little bit, it's using a vector database to get the chunks that it wants that are related. And what it does is give some information, and then at the very bottom, it gives you some sources. The sources that it used for these two, these are actually older ones. I did it with Pydantic AI and LangChain, ended up going with LangChain. But if you want to do a same app with Pydantic AI, there is a Pydantic AI version of this app. That is the finished application that we're going to create today. Let's just jump into actually coding this thing. If you jump back over to the left, we have our imports, then our setup for our page. Our first method is approx. What approx does is approximate the number of tokens that we want to cut the README file to. We are saying max of 2,000 tokens, and we're going to times it by 4 because there's around four characters per token. And then we're going to iterate through the string and just cut it at that max. Next, we have this parsing function or method. What it does is it just gets the username from the GitHub string. I know this is a mess and I'm sorry for it, but yeah, that's a crappy regex. There's probably an easier way to do it. Let me know if you figured out one down below. Next, we have the cloning of the repo. We're actually going to cache this resource to improve performance and just keep it in memory. What this does though is it creates a temporary directory that we're just going to clone the repo to and return the repo and the temporary directory. The next method is a pretty simple one. Again, we're just going to get the default branch with the default being main, or we're going to try to grab it from the repo active branch name. Next up is the find readme blob. Why we have this is because we're going to take a chunk of the readme file, the top half, and add it to the system prompt so that the chatbot has a better context of what the repo is about. Rather than trying to use vector embeddings for all that, we're just going to grab the top half that typically has the most useful information on a summary of the repo. We're grabbing it, sending it into the system prompt to improve the chatbot's functionality. We're just going to use common names, and then we're going to check the root. If it's not in the root, we're going to go through and check the tree. If we find it in either one of those, we're going to return it, and otherwise we're just going to return a none. After finding the text, the README text blob, we're then going to read blob text. What this does is it reads the text from the blob and returns the actual text by decoding it. Now we have the fetch README file or fetch README get. What this does is it fetches the README file. We're using the find README blob. And then if it returns none, we're going to say there's no README. And then we're going to use the one we just did and get the blob text and return that. And if that text actually exists, we're going to return it. Otherwise, we're going to return README not found or empty. After the fetch README get, we're going to write the iter match blob. What this does is it yields the blobs that match a specific file extension. When we do the selector we want to look at README files and Python files, this method right here can go through the blobs or files, go through the files and grab the ones with this specific file extension we're looking for. How we do this is we use the repo head commit tree traverse. We're going to traverse over the tree. After checking that we're actually working with a blob, then after getting that path, we're then going to yield, this is like making a list, but it's a bit more performant. But we're going to yield the path and the blob if the file extension matches. Yield. Next, we just have a pretty simple one where we're just going to try to format the docs, just make it a bit easier for the LLM to read. You don't really need to use this if you don't want to, but it can improve it if you have a standardized format. Now we're starting to get to the actual interesting part. All that was just set up. Now we're actually going to create those vector embeddings and work with the LLM to answer questions. What we do in this index repo is, for one, we just start by parsing, clone the repo, these are all methods we already created, get default branch, approximate. These are all returning things that we've already previously discussed. Then we're going to use from LangChain this recursive character text splitter, which just recursively splits the text and tries to hold the words together. After getting all that set up, we're then going to iterate over all the blobs. We're going to yield a new blob that matches our extension. For that one, we're going to make sure it exists, and then we're going to chunk it using the character text splitter. After getting that next file, we're then going to grab the text from it. If the text does exist, we're then going to do file count, add 1 to the file count. Then here we're using the text splitter, splitting the text, which is like a list. Yeah, it is a list of text, and enumerate over each chunk and append it to these documents. This is some metadata that we're adding, that when we add this to our vector database, we can actually remember the source, the repo, the branch, all that information. We're going to create this document and append it to the documents that we created up here, this list of documents. After you create all your documents, we're then going to come down here and create our embedding model using Ollama, create our vector store, which is going to be Chroma, and we're just going to give it our embedding model. Next, we just check to see if we have docs. If we do, we then add the docs to the vector store. Moving down a bit more, we're then going to create a session state variable called retriever. This is our retriever, our vector store retriever, and we're going to do vector store as retriever, and then pass in how many we want to retrieve. So this is in our app. If you saw, I think it's currently the default set to 4. You can change that. This will change how many search results you'll get. Finally, we're just going to print success. After indexing the repo, we're now going to answer the question. How we're going to do this is, for one, just check to see if we have the retriever set up. If they don't load the repo, it's just going to error. Then we're going to retrieve the docs by doing Streamlit session state retriever. That's that session state variable we just set up, and then invoke the question. That returns docs related to that question. We're going to then format those docs and add that to context. Next, we're going to grab that README information, st session state get README, or if there is no README, it's just going to return no README found. Finally, we're going to create our prompt, just giving some information. We're going to pass it our question, and we're going to pass it our context. This is going to be our prompt. After creating our prompt template or our prompt, we're then going to pass it into our chat Ollama, where we're going to pass it our model, our temperature, and then that creates our LLM, and then we do LLM invoke, give it our prompt, and from that we get a response, and from that response we're going to grab the response content, which is just the actual response, not all the metadata, and our documents. Those are all the methods that we're going to be using. Now it's time to create the Streamlit user interface. This is just one big old method. Let's go back up. We have our title, just some information. We're going to set up our sidebar. At the top, we just have our settings. Then we have this model name. If you are having issues with not being able to change your model name, get rid of this and just add it into the values. It might become an issue because it will reset each time, but I'm not sure, and I don't feel like testing it out right now. I just did this for testing purposes. It's a lot quicker just to change that string. Then we have our variables. We have our slider for how many chunks, and we have our character slider and our overlap slider. And we define those right here, and we set them those initial values and then the steps. After the sidebar, we're then going to create that extension selector. This is the default extensions. If you want to add extensions, you can just add them in here. And we add our text input for the GitHub URL. Here we have it, and we have the placeholder and the default value. I just put in the repo for this actual project as the default value because it just makes it easier to test when you can just not have to copy and paste a new one in every single time it reloads. You don't have to have that there though. Then we have the multi-select where we can select the file extensions up here. Then again, our defaults are Python, Markdown, and text. Moving down a bit more, we have the load button. We have a bit of validation to make sure that the URL is good. And if it passes all that, we move on to the else, where we actually index that repo and we pass it the stripped URL, then the extensions, the chunk, the overlap, and the K, all those variables from up here. After we index, this would be where we are in the flow is we input everything and we just hit load. It's loading. There, we have it there, and that is actually going to be right down here. After pressing load, we're then going to create some session state variables, and we're going to set defaults for them, where we're going to set messages. We're going to have an empty list of messages, retriever, none, then readme to empty. You can probably see what we're getting at now, where we're setting up all of these session state variables that we're going to be using later on in the application. Now we have that chat markdown, which you see right here. After that, we're going to move to displaying the message. We're going to look at the role. We're going to iterate over each one of these messages right now because we haven't sent anything. This is an empty list, nothing happens. But once we add a message, the role would be user when I add a first message. And with that role, we're then going to grab the content and print it to the markdown. If I say hi here, that is my message. And I think the other message name is assistant, or yeah, I think it's user and assistant are the two types that, let's just check. Yeah, we have user and assistant, or AI and human. Those are the, I guess, the string. Those are the different roles that a message can take. We're probably using, it looks like it's probably user and AI or user and assistant, who knows. After displaying the message history, we're then going to come down here and just not let the user input anything while the indexing is happening. And then we're going to have the user input right here, which is the chat input. You can see it right down here. And this, now we're at the very end where we're going to display the most recent message. The most recent message, we already printed all the message history. Now we're displaying the most recent message when they hit enter. And then we're also going to display the response. If we actually hit enter or click that button, we're then going to append role user and then content as user input. We just created one of those messages. Then we're going to add that to the chat, where we're just going to do with Streamlit chat message, user chat message, then going to create a markdown chat message that is for users, most recent. Moving down, we're then going to create the assistant or the response. Again, Streamlit chat message assistant. I did use assistant, not AI. Assistant with spinner. So we're just going to fake think. Then we're going to do with the spinner, just showing the user that it's thinking. We're going to try to answer the question using answer, user input, and model. We get the answer and the use documents. We have a little exception here if it errors, and then we're going to print the answer within the chat message. It's going to show up like this. Finally, we're going to append that most recent chat message to our messages. Append, role, assistant, content, answer. That's going to start adding all the chat history to those messages, which we use up at the top right up here, printing all the history. Now, at this point, you could just run it and it will work just fine. The last thing we're going to do, though, is create this sources. I like having these source things to it because you never really know if it's actually utilizing stuff if you don't use these sources. How you do that is a lot of nestled if and for statements. How we create this sources, though, is we check to make sure we're using docs. If we're using docs, we're creating an expander. Expander is just this thing right here. Within that expander, we're then going to create a set to make sure we're not using the same source more than once. When we retrieve stuff, we can, because we're chunking it, we can retrieve multiple chunks from the same source. To negate that, we're not seeing multiple of the same file in here. We're creating a set, but can only be one source. I hope that made sense. Now, we're going to iterate over those used documents, and here's where that metadata comes in. We're then going to grab the metadata from those documents that we created up there and get the source, and we're going to get the URL. The user can go straight to the URL, even though this is not the file we even used. That was a previous file. Or you can see the actual file name, the source of the file. Once a source is seen, we add it to our set and move on and write that source to the expander. This is where it's actually writing it. And if it has a URL, we're then going to also write the URL to the expander. That is it. I guess finally we are doing it if name equals main and run the main, which is our entry point. Let's just reload the app and double check to make sure it's actually working. Let's get this to go crazy and see how many sources we get back. We need a load. You see how it didn't let me click that because I didn't load it. Then now we're going to ask our question. It's going to take a little time, and let's see how many sources we got. I guess there's not that many files in there. There's not going to be that many sources, but if there were more files and it got more from different files, then it would have more sources. Let's bounce this up a lot though and reload. Okay, now we only have 24. Ask the same question. Cool. And then the last thing we want to test is let's just remove. So now we only have 3. Ask the same questions. Now it's just going to be using the markdown. Now we can see that there's nothing, and let's just add something that's not in there. 0 files. Cool. It looks like it's all working. Let me know if you have any questions on how to code this, or if you just want to grab the code. I will put the GitHub repo down below. That is it for our GitHub repository chatbot. I hope you enjoyed this video and I hope you learned something. Please comment down below if you have any questions. And I hope you enjoyed today's video, and I'll see you next time.